Welcome back to Halcyon's virtual studio visit series. I am Nicole Weissman, Halcyon's Director of Communications, and probably not the Nicole you were expecting to see. Nicole Dowd, our Arts Director, is going to join us a little bit later. In the meanwhile, I'm so psyched to be here. I write the emails, I write the social media. I don't get to see you all very often. It's great to see some familiar faces, some folks I think who we met during Arts Community Day last week. Thanks everyone for being here. For folks who aren't familiar with Halcyon, we are a DC-based nonprofit dedicated to empowering social entrepreneurs and civic-minded artists. One of the big ways we do that is with residential fellowships. Another way we've done that the last 2 years is through a festival called By the People, which was a citywide arts and dialogue festival that unfortunately was canceled for 2020. It was supposed to happen in June, but we just announced last week a big piece of this festival that is coming back to life virtually, which is the By the People and Monochrome Collective Art Fair, a partnership with us and Nina O'Neill at Monochrome Collective. Last year it featured over 50 artists local to the DMV area, and it will once again, but in a new format that we think is just going to be really, really great and a chance to support artists who are so much in need right now. So mark your calendars for June 12th through the 28th, which is when that event will be, with a special collector's preview on June 11th. Artists in the DC area are invited to submit to an open call, which is open now through May 10th. We're going to get you a link in the chat. Which brings me to a couple of Zoom things. I know we've done a ton of Zoom events at this point, but if you're looking for the chat, at the bottom of your screen, you've got a toolbar. There's a chat option there. Chat's a great place to drop your questions that our speakers are gonna wanna get to later. And then one other Zoom note in the upper right of your screen, you've got the option to toggle between gallery mode and speaker mode. For today's presentation, it's going to be especially useful to be in speaker mode. So please go ahead and make sure you have that set up right. Finally, I think that's all the housekeeping we can handle for the moment. So I want to introduce our guests. Forgive me for a little bit of reading from a sheet here. Nina O'Neill is founder and director of Monochrome Collective. She's been matching collectors and art for over a decade and founded Monochrome to help clients and collectors create focused, style-driven visual experience in their homes and businesses through art. She also works closely with the emerging artists that she works with on key professional development skills, including pricing their work and presentation, which of course is what we're here to talk about today. She is the curator, once again this year, of the By the People and Monochrome Collective Art Fair. Joining us from the West Coast is artist and photographer Kate Warren. Kate has received awards from PDN, American Photography 36, Women Photograph, Women Photojournalists of Washington, and Photo Week DC. Her work explores identity, gender, mysticism, and is committed to inclusive storytelling and production practices. She's photographed for some places you definitely know: Apple, Harper's Bazaar, Hilton Hotels, Washington Post Magazine, and the New York Times. In fact, last week, the Times published her series of photos documenting glamorous historic theaters in an eerily empty Los Angeles. We're going to get you a link for that article as well, so you can check it out. So whether you're planning to apply for the open call, and I hope you are, or you're just looking for ways to put your art into the world in an increasingly virtual moment, Kate and Nina are here to help you put your best foot forward. We definitely will have room for questions later, so start thinking of them now. And with that, I will pass off to Kate and Nina.
Hi. So we're thrilled to do this. And this is one of those really strange situations where we figured out something that would be universally useful for folks. So we were trying to figure out how artists who are at home and don't have access to photographer friends or photographers that they would hire to take good images of their work. We're at this really strange precipice where the only way folks are going to see work that you've completed is if you can share great documented images of them online. And that's not everybody's forte. It's certainly not mine. So we want to celebrate the work that you're creating, and hopefully you're sending in for the application for the call for the show coming up. We want to be able to celebrate that, and we want you to put your best foot forward and make sure that the work that people see of yours looks primo. The difficult thing too, I mean, shopping for art online, as Kate and I have discussed so many times, is shopping online. So you don't buy jeans if they look terrible on the mannequin or on the model. You want your artwork to really sing and look just as good as it does in your space and as you envisioned it. So we're here to help you through that. Again, as Nicole mentioned, please, any real specific questions, Kate is brilliant. She is not only a great photographer, but a really great teacher. So we're talking about your basement apartment with no light and your ancient cracked iPhone 8, whatever your situation is, we're excited to be able to help you work through your actual problems and take great images of the work that you create so that you can show people and hopefully move it. So Kate and I have known each other and worked together for like 15 years, and it's growing and getting better every day. And so we look forward to your questions and anything specific from us. Holler in the chat along the way, and I'll pass it over to Kate to give us some examples and teach us some stuff.
Thanks so much, Nina, and thank you all for being here. Happy Friday. Happy first day of May. Very exciting. I am here in my apartment in Los Angeles, and I moved out here after doing 8 years in DC about 6 months ago. So it's an interesting time to have moved to a new city, but I spent a really long time deeply ingrained in the creative community of Washington, D.C., and it's always going to be near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited to be here to help support you in your art practices today. So we're gonna do two things. I'm gonna talk to you first a little bit about the principles of photography for you to keep in mind while you're doing this. I've put all of these things in notes in a Google document. I'm going to pop the link to that in the chat at the end, so you're not like reading while we're talking. So you can access that document at any time to use as a reference material while you are going through and documenting your own work. So you can be like, wait, what was that thing she said on the checklist, item 3? You will have the checklist and item 3. So that will hopefully make it pretty easy for you to go through and recreate some of the things that we're talking about today. So to start off, there are 4 principles of photography that you should think about when photographing. And whether you have a big camera or your cracked iPhone 8, it doesn't make too much of a difference, right? Like, ultimately, your camera is just a tool and you take the picture, not the camera. But there are 4 things to keep in mind to sort of optimize the imagery that you're making. First and foremost is light. Light is what makes really great pictures, and it is what makes really not so great pictures. And as you know, if you live in a windowless basement with can lighting in the ceiling that gives you like raccoon shadows under your eyes, bad lighting is really bad. But when you're documenting your work, you can think about light as a tool that you can work with and can control. So when we are thinking about light, we want to think about the quality of light. So is it a hard light source? Like, is it the sun at noon throwing really harsh shadows? Or is it a big soft window, right? Like filling the room with light, kind of like we have here in my space. I'm sitting right now, and here I'll flip around so you can see. You're gonna get a really thorough tour of my apartment today. I've got a big wall of like floor to ceiling windows here that are, as you can see, washing me in gentle, soft light. Now this light, this like nice soft window light, is universally going to be the easiest to work with, the thing that is going to make your art look best most often. And so if you do have a window, that window is about to become your very best friend. If you don't have a window, say if you're in a windowless basement, no big deal. Go outside, bring your work, put it on the shade side of your building, right? Because what you're looking for is diffused light, right? Which means not direct. You don't want that sunlight hitting your piece directly, because if it does, it's gonna pull out any like it's going to really accentuate any weird textures you have going on, right? If it's a painted piece or you know, a 2D work on a piece of paper, you're going to really start to see the texture of the canvas or the texture of the paper as opposed to what is on that surface. If your work is very textured, hard light can be helpful to really showcase that. But by and large, as a general rule, it's good to like keep it in the shade. And you know, so if you have big pieces and you don't have room in your space or whatever to document them, you can't scan them, that kind of thing, bring them outside. I'm going to screen share with you really quickly to give you an example of this. This is work by a DC artist named Martin Swift. Can you guys see? Can we get a thumbs up? Okay, great. This is work by a DC artist named Martin Swift, who's a figurative oil painter. He looks at masculinity. This is outside of his studio. He made this painting. It was too big to hang anywhere in a space that we could style, that we had access to for the short turnaround that he needed for his application. So we walked it outside. He put down this nice like packing blanket. You can use, I'm sure you have like, old Mexican blankets or, something kicking around your house that you can lay down to keep your work safe when you're placing it on the ground. And then and this is something you want to be careful of, he made sure that like it was totally straight up and down as best he could. And we photographed the work like this. You can see the light in this picture looks kind of like the light on me right now, right? As I'm sitting in front of this window. This is a cloudy day. It's really soft light. We're not getting any kind of hard shadows, anything like that. We're not getting any texture on the work, right? So, when we go in, we would do these, here's some different versions, because he wanted one that showed, and he's in there for scale too, right? So you can see how large the work is. And then we went in and did these detail photographs. Right. So if you were just to look at these pictures, you wouldn't know like we're standing in front of like an old carriage house in a back alley, right? Like, but the light is even, you're really able to pay attention to the detail in the work. And you can really see the texture and surface. And then this is the full piece. This is a crop of one of those more pulled back images that you saw earlier. That's it. Like this is literally a photograph that we took like propped on the ground in an alley, but you would never know, right? So because we had that nice soft light, it's really diffused and we're able to really like get a sense of what's happening in the work itself, as opposed to being like, oh, what an interesting photograph, okay? So when we're thinking about light, I'm gonna stop sharing, hello. So when we're thinking about light, we need it to be diffused. We want to think about the quality of light. If you're working inside a space, and I'm gonna demo some stuff here in my apartment, you want to think about sort of like where you are in relation to the window or the source of light, right? So you can have the window directly in front of the work. You can have it 3/4, which is going to give you a little bit more shape and shadow. So if you're photographing an object, that's going to be really helpful to create depth, right? Shadow's not always like something you want to avoid, because if you're photographing a sculptural object, it's really going to give you more volume as opposed to having something feel really flat. And then side light, right? If you want to add really like some more drama and depth for maybe some like detail shots, things like that, right? So you can move your object around your space in relation to the source of the light and play, right? And you can like use your iPhone, right? And set it up, and I'll walk you through how to do that. But you always want to be cognizant of where the light is coming from. If you are shooting and you notice that it's feeling a little harsh and you're picking up some of that weird texture, be like, okay, like at what time of day is the light less direct in the space, right? My house is east-west facing, so the light in the back of my house right now is really bright and really high key, but the light in the front right now is very diffused. In, what time is it now? In 7 hours, it is going to be super golden hour light in this room right here, and I would never photograph work in this room at that time of day, because the color temperature is going to be really warm and it's going to be giving me really harsh shadows, right? So I would think, okay, like the light is most soft in my space at this time of day, so I'm going to wait and photograph when the light is going to be best, right? Time is one way that you can work with available light. What else? Yes, we covered all these things. Okay, so that's the deal with light. The second piece is composition, right? So if you're working with either a camera or your phone, I always recommend tripod mounting if you can. It really just helps you make sure all of your angles are straight. That's going to make your life in post-production easier. So you want to, set it up. Photographing 2D wall-based works, you want to make sure those lines are really straight. You're not getting any kind of distortion or anything like that. Make sure if you're going to hang a work, make sure it's straight. Pay attention to like what's in the frame, and we'll walk through all of these sort of like little check marks that you want to go through in your process, right? Because you have your documentation picture of just the work itself, and then you also want to do like an environmental portrait, if you will, of your work to show it in space with a piece of furniture or a lamp or something for scale, so people can really get a sense of how big it is, right? Because if you're shopping online, a picture of a picture of a purse just on white, you're like, is that a tiny purse or is that a huge purse? I can't actually really tell, right? So we want to give folks an idea of how big the thing is that they're shopping for, and composition can really help with that. So when you're photographing, you want to run down a checklist. You want to ask, does the piece look distorted? Is there anything distracting in the frame? You want to check the background and say like, okay, is there anything weird happening in the background of this picture? You want to ask, especially for those environmental pictures, is the image visually balanced? Does like zooming out a little bit give us a little bit more scope and scale? Having a little bit more white space, can sometimes be really helpful. And then you want to ask, is the work the star, right? You don't want to ever have something so styled or so, or so busy that it becomes more about the photograph than the work. You want your work to be the star. When in doubt, keep it simple, right? And have that nice soft diffuse light coming from either your window or if you're outside on a shady wall. The next piece to think about is color. And color when photographing your work is really important because it can get screwed up really easily. When we think about light, we often think about bright or dark. But we also need to think about the color of the light. So when you're photographing, you want to do your best to have one light source because this is going to make your life way easier. The light coming in from outside is daylight balanced. Right now, for me, as you can see a little bit, it's a little green, in part because there are like big palm trees outside my window, and I've got some like philodendron hanging in my front window. Those are changing the color of the light to make it a little bit green, right? So that's something that I have to be aware of when I'm shooting and in post. If I had a lamp on, this lamp right here, if I had this lamp on, that would be a really warm light. So then I'm getting this daylight and I'm getting a warm light, and I can't quite get to neutral in post-production. So when you're shooting with a window light, turn all of your room lights off, everything. You want one light source. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And then we'll talk about how to think about white balance in post-production. And that brings us to post-production, because you take the pictures, they look great, they're a starting point, but the way to really take them to the next level, and you can do this on an iPhone, is to edit. Now there are 4 things that I recommend you think about when you're thinking about editing, because I know it can be really technical feeling and it's kind of scary, so the idea is to keep it pretty simple. 1, we want to think about exposure, right? Is it too bright? Is it too dark? Okay. So you want to move that little, you open up the picture in Photos on your iPhone and then click Edit. There's like a little icon, and then there are options, right? And there's no science to it necessarily. You want to make sure that it feels bright enough. Make sure the brightness on your phone is turned all the way up while you're doing this, right? So move that slider back and forth and be like, okay, like what feels good to me? What looks right? So do your exposure first. Then you want to do your white balance. When you're editing on your iPhone, there are 2 functions. There's tint and warmth. Usually, sometimes they have different names. One takes your picture on the spectrum from blue to orange, right? So if something's feeling a little too warm or a little too cool, okay, we can adjust that. And then the other one is from green to like pink. And so you want to make sure it's not feeling like too much of any one of those things. The idea is to really like get to neutral. And you can do that just by sort of noodling with it and be like, okay, like I look at this picture, like it doesn't look quite right. So like, let me start to play with some of these things and see like what makes it feel better to me, right? And you're artists, right? So you have a good eye for color, and you can see like, okay, if we're looking at, you know, if we look at like Maggie's thumbnail right now from Halcyon, like her light's pretty warm compared to mine. Mine's pretty cool. So like maybe she cools down a little bit. Maybe I warm up a little bit if we want a color balance. You know, like Nina's looking a little warm right now too. Like, okay, cool. But warm on skin tone is pretty flattering. But if you're doing art, it might be a little too warm, right? So you want to you can sort of just play with it. The next piece is contrast, especially when photographing art. I like to bump that a little bit, just to make but again, you want your art to look like it does to the naked eye. You don't want to make these images to be sort of some like augmented reality or to change the very nature of your work. The idea is just to document, right? And what contrast does is it makes your brights a little brighter and your darks a little darker, right? It like pulls it in both directions. And so and again, just like give it a little nudge, be like, how's that feel? Give it a little more, be like, oh, too far maybe, we'll bring it back, right? So you can play with it based on feel. And again, you all have really amazing eyes because you're creative professionals. So you can use that eye to be like, okay, like how do I make my work look the way I want it to look? And then the final thing in post-production that you should think about is the angle. There are features in your iPhone editing to change the tilt, and you can change it vertically, right? So if something's hanging on a wall and it's hanging off of like a wire and it's hanging a little forward, you can account for that in post-production, right? If you accidentally were one step too far to the right and it's looking a little like this, you can in post, right? And you can do that on your iPhone. There's literally, same as the other things, there's just a slider. So you would just move that, you know, get your rotation right, make sure all your lines are good. And these things have auto functions, great. Start with auto. See how the phone handles it first. And then if you need to make slight adjustments, you can do that. So that sort of walks us through like the quick and dirty. To go back and summarize, you want to think about light, where it's coming from. You want something soft, something big like a window or outside on a wall. You want to think about composition. Is it too busy? Is your art really the star, right? Are those lines nice and straight? You want to think about color. Again, one light source makes that way easier. And then you want to do some basic post-production to really add a final level of polish to your images. Do we want to take a beat for questions before we demo?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We've had a couple of awesome questions already, and some I think on the very specific side, others a little more general. Folks, feel free to drop your questions either way, even if they're super specific. Let's start with a couple, and then we'll pause to kind of collect a couple more. But just as a sort of starting off point, one quick and easy question, I think. We got one question: applications for post other than Photoshop Creative Suite. What do you like?
So as a photographer, I use Lightroom because you can batch edit, which I really love. It has all the same functionalities as Photoshop with like 100% less complication. Photoshop's really powerful because there are 9 ways to do the same thing. I personally get kind of overwhelmed by that. I use Photoshop for very specific things like retouching skin, right? Or like compositing. But Lightroom is really powerful, and many of the professional photographers that I know and work with use it to catalog and organize their images and to edit. So everything lives in one place, which is really great. And I personally find the user experience and the barrier to entry for Lightroom to be much lower than Photoshop. I find it to be much more intuitive, and it's something that I personally feel that you can kind of jump into and start playing with those sliders and seeing what it does to your images and be like, okay, cool. You know, there are obviously like more complicated things that you can do in it and learn a little bit at a time, but especially for these purposes, you just need a pretty straightforward editing software. That said, you can also use like the iPhone, like the photo function, the photo editing function on like your Mac. Like that does a fine job. That does all the things we need it to do. You know, it doesn't have to be super complicated. And truly, if you're shooting on your iPhone, you can do all the edits that you need on your iPhone.
We had a question, sort of one similar point from April and Irene, though April, I see your hand is raised. So if this doesn't answer your question or you have another question, leave it up and we'll be sure to come back to you. You know, Irene asked about photographing reflective surfaces like plexiglass, especially when you were talking about light. And then the other half of the question was from April. She does artworks that are oils that are 100 inches tall. So she gets a lot of light reflecting because of the oil, but also because it's so tall. Any recommendations for them?
That's really hard. Like photographing things that are shiny or reflective is like truly the most difficult thing that you have to do. I would say, so, but we have to think about light as like an object in motion, right? Like right now the light is coming like straight in and sweeping over my face. But I'm also being filled by a window over here. I'm getting a little rim light from that window back there, right? So we can think of, when we think about like the angle of light, that's where reflections come from. So to get rid of a reflection, either you need to move the light or you need to move from where you're taking the picture, right? So oftentimes when I'm photographing things that are very reflective, I will have a light come in from above and sort of like gently sweep. I would say a very shady side of the building is probably going to be your best bet to simulate that, especially if your work is large. But it's hard when you're photographing things like plexi. You also can get some foam board, and set it up to like block that reflection from happening. And you can get some black. If you're shooting plexi and you want to cut glare or reflection, get some black like foam board or poster board, and like you can find a way to MacGyver prop it up or get a little light stand and clamp it to it. Totally, whatever you have around, you can MacGyver all of these things, right? It doesn't have to be an expensive solution. But you would place that and walk it around and like watch, because you'll see where it starts to cut that glare, right? Like if I'm photographing if I'm photographing someone inside through a window, and the light is really bright outside, that reflection on the window from the outside world shows you just the outside and not what's inside. But if I put up a black piece of foam core, then I can see inside the window. Okay.
Awesome.
I'm jumping in for 1 second with one tip that I have that's incredibly useful for those artists who are photographing works on paper that happen to be framed and have a glass and plexiglass. That's your issue. My recommendation for that, which Kate told me too, you take the glass off for taking pictures. So remove the glass or the plexi when you're taking an image of your work hanging on the wall. Just like the picture hanging behind Nicole, it doesn't really have glare, which is wonderful. But if it did, for example, you just pop that out, showcase it in its frame, and then you can get documentation images of your work without competing with the reflection, because you're always going to be competing with it. Okay.
Amazing. And I see a couple more questions coming in. Keep them coming. We've got lots of time. I do want to take a quick pause to mention one thing. As I mentioned earlier, April's using the raise hand function. April, we're going to come right to you when we come back. If you look at the bottom of your screen and you see a participants option, you can raise a hand there if you prefer to share your question in your own words. We'll make sure to come to you and unmute you so you can ask your question. That's just an alternative to using the chat. And then as folks formulate questions, we're noting them all, so drop them in the chat or raise your hand. I want to just pass it quickly to my colleague, Sam Myers. Sam, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much,
Hello.
Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Nina and Kate, for that, the session. It was super interesting, very helpful, and I look forward to seeing some of this work at our virtual art fair. I just want to say really quickly, as we continue to stay home and socially and be socially distant, Halcyon is really committed to continuing this programming. In addition to supporting our artists and entrepreneurs that hold residence with us, we're hoping these sessions in some small way bring everyone a little knowledge and a little joy and a little togetherness at the moment. So thank you all for being here today. I just have one really quick announcement on behalf of Halcyon about something that's very exciting that's happening right now. For those of you that don't know, Halcyon is a 501c3 nonprofit. That means that we rely entirely on donations in order to keep our programming going and to keep supporting our fellows. Yesterday, we launched a very exciting campaign with our friends at the Georgetown Bid in honor of Giving Tuesday Now. Giving Tuesday Now is a global crowdfunding campaign for nonprofits in light of COVID-19. So it's for this coming Tuesday. And a generous donor of ours has offered to match the campaign funds. So every donation for this campaign will be doubled. So the run of it is, for every dollar donated to this campaign, $1 is given to the Georgetown Bid's Employee Emergency Relief Grant Program, which helps support workers in Georgetown who are unemployed because of COVID-19. And another match dollar will go to Halcyon so that they can continue to support our fellows and our social entrepreneurs at this really, really difficult time. And I think that really now more than ever, it's important to fund the world that we want to see when we all make it out of this. So if you can donate, only if you are in the place to do so, please consider donating. If you can't donate, please consider sharing this campaign with your friends and anyone you think may be interested. We're all really excited about this. I'll put some links to everything in the chat so you can find it all quickly. Thank you all so much for your attention, and thank you all for being here today. I'll pass it back to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Sam. And I see a couple more questions, and I know Kate wants to get to a little bit of a demo as well. So Kate, why don't we pass back to you, do a little demo, and then we'll hit questions, full stride for the rest of our time.
Okay, great. All right, welcome to my apartment. I'm gonna get up off the couch and bring you with me so we can talk about a couple of things, or so I can demo a couple of things we just talked about. Okay, so here, I'm gonna set this up sort of the way I would shoot it. This is a work by DC artist Rose Jaffe. She's great. This is just a credenza that I have in my entryway. And you can see that I've taken, it's usually much more styled. I took a bunch of stuff off of it. But as you can see, we are getting a little bit of glare off this plexi, right? So I can start to play with like, okay, does it go away when I tilt differently? No. What I would do is go over to the window and close the sheer curtains that are on the window. That would do it, right? But with this, we get a sense of scale of the work, right? We kind of know how big flowers are, for instance, and you can really see, and you can get a kind of a clean shot, right? So if I was going to photograph this this work, I would, first of all, I would prop it up completely straight. I would tripod mount my phone or camera, and I would cut that glare by closing the curtains. I would photograph the work, and then I would pull back and do kind of this sort of arrangement, right? Because you can see it in situ, so people can start to imagine it in their own homes. So that's one example of shooting a flat work. Now if we come over, and that's being lit, just so you can see, okay, it's being lit by these nice big windows in the front. It's also then being filled by these two windows here, okay? So that light is coming in and is sweeping really softly and gently across the work. So if we come over here to our, oh, and one thing to mention, this is why this is here, make sure you wipe down your surfaces. Dust your work, wipe down the flat surfaces that they're sitting on or propped up on. Pay attention to those little details because those are the things that give you kind of that final polish that you're looking for. If we are, here's our sculpture. This is just a cute object that I had. This is just foam core, okay? So I have this around for photo purposes. You can literally order it online, preferably not from a big retailer because we're shopping small and supporting local businesses. So do your best to support small business, but order some foam core, some poster board. You can, they have it at the hardware store too. You find the kind that works for you. Gator board is really, really strong. It's a little heavier, takes up a bit more space when you store it. And you're just looking to create like a plain surface. I like gator board because it's white on one side and black on the other. So if you have light works, you can photograph them on a dark background and vice versa. But in general, on white is like a pretty safe bet. I've got it set up here on my dining room table. Right, okay, we'll come back up. And you can see the shadows behind it? That's me, because now this laptop is in front of the light source. So if I really wanted to cut that, I can get down a little lower, right? And the camera on my computer is pretty wide, but you could get in closer and just frame up your sculptural object. Now we can see that we're getting we're getting some highlight in here that's shiny, right? Like, okay, that's cute, we like that. And we're like, okay, that's coming from the front window. Great. But there's also a window over here. So when we turn it, we get some nice highlight there. So maybe we do our primary image with the work straight on. Hang on, I'm going to put you down. Put you down. Okay, there. So maybe we do our primary image with the work straight onto camera. And then we do, maybe we do like 3/4 view. Maybe we do like a back view. Play around with different compositions and see what you like. I would say, and then you would pull this image into post and really like just bump that exposure a little bit to make sure your whites look really white, right? So it's not super distracting. So that's an example of a little still life. And just so you can see, I literally just like have that propped up with like a light stand. So then I can just boop, take that down, and then come over here to our next situation. This is a piece by a DC-based artist, Stephen Benedicto. You can see it is highly reflective. It's plaster, hand-carved, covered in graphite. So actually when you touch it, it's like getting pencil lead on your fingers, which I think is really amazing. It's super sensual. And as you can see, depending upon where I am, the light really changes a lot on it, right? It can look really reflective, right? Or that glare can like sort of be cut, right? You can see where I pass, right? Look, my shadow is in the middle of the piece right now. I'm cutting the light. And then when I move, so when I talk about using flags to reduce glare, right? Like a black piece of poster board, I'm standing in for that right now. So you can sort of see like when you move the black around, it cuts that glare. So if I was photographing this piece, I would come, I like a pretty shiny iteration of this work. So does the artist. So I would come and I would shoot it from a couple of different angles but look, you can see my head, right? When I move it, the shadow, see how the shadow moves, right? So like pay attention to that kind of stuff. So I would move this chair and I would just shoot the work. And then I would probably do, I'm just gonna turn my computer. I would probably do like a vertical composition and come in, and my angles aren't straight, but this does give you a sense of like how I can use that chair to create a bit more sort of like an installation feel. So you can really get a sense of like how big the thing is, if that makes sense. You also, when you're photographing things, can bounce light. If there's too much shadow, this is just a reflector. You can use a piece of foam board or a poster board, right? So like white is going to add light and black is going to add shadow. So when you have light coming in from your window, if you're like, oh man, like I want a little bit more shape, you would put that black just right out of frame, so it's bouncing a shadow onto it to add a little bit more shape to your piece. And if you are like, man, that shadow that's on this side is like not really serving me, I want to open up a little bit more, you would do the same thing with white, and it would bounce that light that's coming in, it would cut boop, right back onto your piece. So that's so those are some little demos to sort of show you what we've talked about. And we can, and then I'll show you one more case study that actually Nina and I worked together. This is work that we did for an artist named Gary. And I'm gonna screen share so you can see this. Boop, boop, hello, okay. So this is what we delivered to him, okay? So he makes sculptural works and paintings. And I'm just gonna walk you through really quick. So you can see we're doing multiple angles. This is artificially lit, but you can do the same thing with moving around in natural light. We wanted, his pieces are pretty glossy, so we wanted a little bit harder light source, which is how we're getting kind of that shiny spot right there. And we're coming in to show the grain of the wood because these are handmade pieces. And this is an uncropped thing, and I left this in here so you can see that we just put a piece of poster board behind to create that very clean studio feel, okay? So that gives you a sense of, we're playing with different angles, right? These details show you it's like a little guy in a corner, right? So different angles to help tell the story of each piece differently, right? We need this, but we also, I think, need this because we get a sense of how the work exists spatially. So think about your shot list. I always like to have, something like this, and then like a closer detail shot, right? Plus that more environmental installation experience, right? And this is the setup that we used. And you can get, all of this stuff for really cheap. So it's not a major cost investment. You don't have to even have a light stand. You could put a chair back there and prop your white poster board up against the chair. That's all you have. It's really is an opportunity to sort of MacGyver solutions. And then we made work of Gary in the space with his work, right? So Nina and I styled and created this environment so you could see how all of his works work together. You have the sculptural pieces on the pedestals, you have paintings, the light is really even, the colors are nice and bright, the way that they exist on the works themselves. And then I put in a little bit of a studio wall on the left here just to create a little bit of a sense of depth and he wasn't sure about the pink, so I took the pink in and out, right? So you can think about, those choices too. Nina and I both like the pink, so we sent him options with both. And here are just the documentation images that we had of the paintings, right? Really clean, different angles, right? This had some iridescence, so we did shoot it deliberately from an angle to show iridescence, and then some clean artist portraits to go with that as well. So and then ends up with a library of images that are all creatively contiguous, sort of in conversation with one another, and you get a sense of how the work all works together. Okay, that's it.
That's awesome.
Try to keep it quick and dirty so we can jump right to your questions.
No, it's so helpful to see some of the examples because it makes it all make a lot more sense, especially for someone like me who's not as steeped in all of this. So I appreciate that. We're gonna roll through as many questions as we possibly can. When you do these events, your dream is to have this many questions coming in. So I will start by, I think we had a hand raised from April, who's been so patient for such a long time. Let's go ahead and start by unmuting April, and you can share your question with us.
Okay, hi everyone. I don't know if you can see me or not. I'm in the studio right now. I have these two paintings I'm just working on, hopefully for Smack Melon in New York and Dumbo. And I'm already terrified that I'm not gonna be able to photograph them properly. I have a 35mm camera and I have an iPhone. The iPhone seems to work best. We get a lot of shine. And what I'm trying to figure out is how far away, after I block out all my windows and I set up some lighting, coming in from angles, how far away do I need to be from these 100-inch paintings to get them, because they're like long vertical shapes, almost like a scroll. So what I'm trying to do is to get them as detailed as possible, because with these submittal things, you only are able to upload like 1 or 2 images of the painting at a time. So I want to, I'm wondering how far do I have to be and what angles do I need to have the lights at coming in from the sides to get these big paintings done right?
Totally. That's a great question. So the two devices that you have to photograph with, the iPhone and a 35mm camera, which many people have, are both pretty wide angles. That when it gets wide, things start to get distorted, right? The things get pulled a little bit to the edge of the frame. If you're shooting with your iPhone and you find that that's the tool that's serving you best, and you're finding that things are getting a little distorted, just do a little bit of a zoom, right? So it's better for you to back up. If you have the works mounted on the wall, go up a couple steps of your ladder so you are straight on eye level to that work, so you don't have to deal with the perspective shift that comes with like shooting up at something, right? You want to be straight on. So get up on that ladder. I would say you want your lights to, if you want your stuff to look shiny, you play with your lights and put them, play with the different angles, and because the reflections are going to change depending upon where things are, and that's a totally personal preference. There's not a right way or a wrong way. There's just, how do I light and photograph this to really convey the work in a way that is true to my vision as an artist, right? So, but I would say get up on that ladder, do a little zoom on your iPhone, check out the light, be like, and then you're gonna have to scamper up and down unless you have an assistant with you, right? And move those lights around a little bit, like make little small changes, be like, okay, this is too much reflection, or this is not quite enough reflection, right? And so move around, take some options, do that little zoom trick. And then, if you can only submit 1 or 2 images, I would say make sure you have like a full-size image of the work. And then if there's texture to the work or whatever, like get right in there and do like a nice detail shot as your secondary shot. Does that make sense?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, it does. It totally makes sense. Thank you. My issue is so much of the work has a bright shine on it. They're very glossy. But then you lose all the color details. So it's like,
and frankly, what I might recommend, if you want to have more control over that, make yourself, you can Google how to make a V flat.
V-flat?
Yeah, how to make a V flat. And a V flat, all a V flat is, that's what I was using over here. It's gator board. That's white on one side and black on the other, and they're big and tall. They're like 8 feet tall, and you can open them up and prop them up at an angle, and that way you can control the light a lot better, right?
Thank you.
So you can like flag things off or like bounce the light back on it to make it more diffused if you want less highlight. So you can, V-flats are really an amazing tool to manipulate light and give you a lot more control. So if you are feeling like you don't have quite enough control, that's what I would recommend. And you can make them for cheap, for like less than $100.
Okay, that's what I need.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheap MacGyver solutions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm also going to jump in really quickly and say that if you do take good photos that you're proud of and you feel like represent the majority of the work, but there are some editing tweaks you want to make, artists, photographers like Kate and others that don't have gigs right now because events aren't happening, they would probably be very excited to get jobs where they were asked to do editing work for color correction, etc. So don't be afraid to reach out to photographers that you know now to make adjustments to photos that you take with your brand new V-flat.
Awesome. And Nina, I think 3 questions that have come in that are kind of related-ish that I want to send to your way. Kristen asked, for selling 2D work online, do you suggest including both physical and framed and also scanned versions? So that's sort of one. Anne asked, what do galleries like to see in terms of just the work versus some amount of the wall as well? What's the trend there? And then the third was, what are your thoughts about websites that stage your work for you, that'll sort of, apply to, and that question was from Ashley. Those all seem like they're in the category of what are folks who are selling your work kind of looking to see?
Really good job lumping those because it's scale is so important. It's really hard for the human eye to read numbers and understand what that means in scale and space. So as you saw in that body of work that Kate and I produced for Gary Kretz's artwork, it was really important to showcase his sculptures, but to give you a sense of how big he was in relation to them and what the space looked like and how the paintings looked. So you always have to give some kind of reference image. You can't just have objects floating in space. And if you're going to sell things framed, you need to show what the frame looks like. There are plenty of websites that do lots of really good things showing off, photoshopping or imagining what your picture would look like above a couch. Sometimes it looks great, sometimes it doesn't look so great, but it's necessary information. So the rules of thumb that I use for objects that are not offensive for spaces are plugs and pencils. It's not disorienting to see an outlet on a wall. Usually they're not too big and distracting in the picture. So if you can hang something on a wall, on a blank wall, above an outlet, that's a useful tool to be able to say, okay, well, I know how big an outlet is, and it's not a staged photo that way. That gives me a reference for how big the picture is. If it's something smaller, and you can put a pencil next to it, or close by, or at least in the frames that you know how big that is, they're not buying it just off of that one image. You're going to give them lots of other tools. So those are my tips for those. I hope that helps.
And I hope while I was writing down questions, you didn't answer this. But Suzanne asked specifically about establishing scale for sculpture when photographing. You know, whether to put a person, I really curious what you have to say about this one.
Okay, so here's what I have to say about this one. The pencil trick is useful if you're really quick and dirty and need to get an image of something. It's a 3D object next to another 3D object. That's great. What I like to do is if you have made a series of 3 sculptures, for example, you can have individual shots of each one and then show them all together, and then show them all together with a pencil. This gives your eye, well, I know how big this one is, and then I guess that tells me how big those 2 would be together, and that informs how big the third one is. It kind of orients your brain in space so that you don't forget how big they are when you see multiple images later. Sculptures, it's complicated, but no matter what, if you can find a common object that is just not offensive having the space, that's my go-to.
Thanks, Nina. One question relating to something that Kate had mentioned earlier about when you tilt the image on iPhone. The question was, does the resolution change? And then follow up to that, what software is good for making 72 DPI to 359 DPI? I hope that means a lot more to you than it did to me.
Yeah, it does. When you tilt, no, it does not change the resolution of your image. If you are, for the second part of your question, this is Sal. If you want to take, what you're asking is, can I take a low res image and turn it into a high res image? And the answer basically is no, which is not a great answer, because basically you're saying, like, can I take this thing that has a little bit of information and turn it into a thing with a lot of information? And like that, it's a one-way street. You can take a thing with a lot of information and simplify it, but you can't really work in the other direction. Really the easiest tool for resizing, and you can take a stab at turning a 72 into 300 and see what happens. Bad things won't happen, but you know, give it a shot. I use Preview. If you're on a Mac, Preview has a resize function that's super easy. You can also use tools like photo editing software like Lightroom, or the photo editing tool in your Apple.
And Kate, a couple more for you. Sally had asked, you mentioned earlier about using a black board. Would a gray board also work? She said she's using light gray. What do you think of that idea?
As a backdrop, or as a negative fill?
I think a negative fill was the question.
Yeah, so you want to use something black, I would say, or something dark. Light gray is probably it's probably not going to do a whole lot for you, because it's kind of a neutral. So even if you have like a black sheet or like a black blanket, right? That's something that you can hang and use to negative fill.
Awesome. And Sally, I have a feeling
for a backdrop?
That is backdrop. There we go.
That's personal preference, right? Like, I mean, I think always erring on the side of like keeping things pretty neutral, but you saw with Gary's images, right? We shot them on a pink wall, and then he was like, I don't know about pink, so I turned them gray in post. Like, it really is personal preference for what is going to make your work sing. Nina, do you want to add anything more to sort of industry standard practices on that?
No, honestly. I mean, it's most people are used to seeing things on a white wall. A lot of homes have gray walls. If you're really trying to sell pieces to somebody's interior, maybe you want to just really make it sing on a different colored background. In particular, a lot of Gary's works, I know we just keep talking about this, but we had that body of work we could look at there, have really good warm tones. The pink background did so much for them. And so it was great for being able to have kind of more publication images, but for application images, his preference was to have a more neutral background. I don't think that there's a right answer, but I do think when you found the wrong color, you'll know.
Awesome. And I think hopefully we have time to get through. We'll squeeze in 2 more questions. One, Kate, was can you touch on developing an editing process for film?
Can you clarify the question?
Question asker. Feel free to clarify a little bit in the chat. We'll come back to that one. And in the meanwhile,
is photographed using film.
that was my understanding of the question, but we'll leave it to be clarified really quick, and we'll turn to another one just in the interest of time. I love a good specific question. This one says, from Sarah, would you have any recommendations for photographing collages that aren't standard sizes? They don't fit in a standard frame. I have several collages I'm considering affixing to another piece of paper before matting for photos, or even just pinning to the wall. What are your suggestions?
Nina, you want to take that?
Sure. Sure. Standard sizes are irrelevant, and custom framing is the way everybody has to treat work, right? Like running to the store and buying a frame is, it feels easy, but it's not how the art consumer should approach this. These are beautiful, unique objects people are making. They deserve custom spaces. So don't freak out about making custom sizes. This goes back to that question somebody had about using sites that create kind of fake in situ situations with the works. If you are able to Photoshop a really good scan of an image into a frame that would be just like the frame that you would have custom made for it, if you don't have that done already, that's my vote. I think being able to represent it as cleanly as it will look in real life is better than kind of mucking up your artistic vision by trying to cram it in an 8x10 space because that's what you've got. So be true to your artistic vision and force the space to match around it.
And I am going to go ahead and start to wrap us up, because Nina has generously offered that we can share contact information for Monochrome Collective in the post-event email, since there were additional questions. And I think, you know, as Nina mentioned, there are a lot of ways that we can utilize the skills of consultants like Nina and photographers right now to make sure that we're doing a great job of collecting bodies of work and being ready now for stuff like the virtual art fair, and in the future to put our best feet forward. My God, we are definitely, it's time to wrap up. So thanks to everyone for the incredible questions and for the great session, especially to Kate and Nina for sharing your expertise. Kate, please visit us in DC as soon as you're allowed to. That is going to conclude our event. We are going to leave the event open for a couple minutes in case folks want to stick around and chat. Please check out our full calendar of May events. We're going to take a break from virtual studio visits next week, but next Wednesday, we have a Breakfast with Halcyon event focused on education and how the COVID-19 crisis is affecting classrooms. That's with some of our social enterprise fellows. The week after next, we have a special happy hour virtual studio visit with one of our Arts Lab fellows, Alex Braden, at 4 o'clock. We are going to send you an email after this with lots of great information, some links that we shared in the chat here, so you won't lose all of that stuff. Thank you again to Kate and Nina and to all of you for spending some time with us on Friday afternoon. Have a great one.